meeting of the Carson City Library Board of Trustees. For January, let's go ahead and call roll.
Chairperson Knight,
Present.
Vice Chair Cranston,
Present.
Trustee Lucas,
Present.
Trustee Markle, present. Trustee Nichols,
Present.
a quorum is present.
Thank you. All right, well, guys, I'm going to just go ever so slightly out of order. I was just trying to find a spot ahead of the meeting when we were putting the agenda together. Trying to find a spot to just say a couple words. So before we begin with anything else tonight, I want to take a minute to mark the passing of a longtime advocate for libraries and our former trustee, Phyllis Patton, who passed away on December 7th, right after our, so we missed it at our last meeting. So those of you who had worked with Phyllis in any capacity know how much she meant to our library. So if you'll give me a minute, I'd like to take a moment of silence in honor of Phyllis Patton, if you'll. Thank you. Thank you, trustees. So moving on, let's do some public comment. Any members of the public who wish to address the Library Board of Trustees may come forward, speak on any topic that is relevant to the board. I'm not going to call for comment over the phone. I don't see any in the room. So hearing none, we'll move on to approving the previous meeting minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those minutes? And do we have any edits, any comments? How about a motion to to accept?
This is Trustee Markle. I move that we accept the minutes of the previous meeting.
Thank you, Trustee Merkel.
Sure.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Motion
I'm going to
passes.
abstain because I wasn't
Because
here.
you weren't here. Thank you. That was good looking out. All right. Moving right along. Item 4A, that's the our one out of order item. Item 4B, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the approved Carson City Library calendar, recognized library celebration weeks for promotional events. You guys might remember last meeting, we wanted to add on those promotional events, just kind of as they were having to keep those front of mind. Those are very frequently great opportunities to start broader conversations and advocate for different areas where libraries need advocacy. So did you all get an opportunity to take a look at those? I feel like it's further down back here. I know I saw it.
Madam Chair, Todd Colgrove, if I may,
Of course.
just
There it is.
remind the trustees that any of these events that they might be particularly interested in, that they think that the library should reflect more publicly, that staff would be more than happy to put together proclamations and try to get them to the Board of Supervisors in time so that the mayor and the community can announce it as in conjunction with the library itself.
Trustees, do you have anything to add there? I'm looking through the phone at you, Trustee Cranston. All right, well, thank you for adding on this added list with these summaries. We just, every day, there's some library-related thing going on, which is just lovely. I don't know if you all saw, and this is probably off topic, but yet another reigning Jeopardy champion is unseated by a librarian.
Yes.
Once again. So for those of you who are playing along with Jeopardy, but anyway, all that to say, librarians are awesome. I don't know that we need an action necessarily here, other than to approve if we want to. It's already been approved. It was just nice of you to incorporate that you did the thing we asked you to do. If not, we'll move on to item 4C. A discussion possible action concerning the process by which the annual unclassified job performance appraisal and evaluation will be completed for the library director. It's a good idea to get a jump on these early because they do sometimes just creep up on you. And I know last year was one of those times. Typically, trustees, at least in the past, we have done something called a 360 evaluation where we have kind of a third party come through and do surveys and go from, they'll tend to talk to stakeholders, staff, and independently compile all that feedback for us to review, for us to get a more complete picture when we do those the eval for our library director. So that's what's been. Yep, go ahead.
Last year, that was the piece that didn't happen, correct?
Right. Last year we did, we got a late start, and that's why we're talking about it in January this time, even though the thing's not due till this summer. And we ended up getting a late start, and we did kind of a pretty informal kind of email, but it wasn't as robust as previous years' evals had been.
Right. And I think we
yeah.
maybe used a survey that wasn't necessarily directed at for this purpose. It was
Yeah.
like a broader library survey, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Recollection.
I feel like we got that type of feedback though too. That was a little bit more broad. So and I've got a couple new trustees here as well. If you have questions about the process or the different options, I mean, certainly a 360 appraisal is not the only type of eval that can be done, but it is collectively our job to complete this task. So I'm going to put it on our radars early.
Okay.
So how is what do you do? Select an organization, or do you go to HR and ask them for suggestions, or what's the process?
Yeah, so Carson City HR does this in other areas, and HR is not the one doing the survey. They do have an agreement with the third party that can do surveys. They do it for other departments. And my understanding is there wouldn't be a cost attached to using that vendor. But, you can be as robust, I think, as our municipal contract law allows for, if budgets exist as well. But that would probably be the road I would go through, is just using the existing resources through Carson City HR and what's already established that works for other departments. Unless you all feel strongly about anything else. I mean, really, this is a collective decision.
I think I'd like to go, because we missed a year, and have the 360 done if that's an option, and certainly if there's already resources in place for that.
Okay.
We should definitely pursue that this year.
I agree.
I agree too.
It sounds good. Well, I'll get on that. Acting on y'all's behalf when we're not all convened, I'll reach out to HR and get the ball rolling that way. And I'll be back with an update for you next month and to make sure this stays so we don't lose track of it.
This is Trustee Markle. I just would have, the concern that I have right now is that there are several significant staff vacancies. And I would think that we would want to time our 360 evaluation in such a way that the possible new employees might have an opportunity to more fully understand the organization and the structure. And I mean, so
So we
do
don't
it-
want to ask them on their first day
No.
how it's going.
Right. So let's not do it in February.
That's fair.
Maybe we should wait until, May. Hopefully, there will be more staff
Right.
and it will be more indicative of, what we're looking for.
Yeah. That's a good point on timing. Any other discussion on that? So, really, we do have an opportunity to provide feedback or input as to what we want to see on the survey. So, not to put anybody on the spot right now to come up with anything, but if you have something that's really pressing that you want to see addressed on our survey, let me know. And like I said, I'll be back with an update from HR next meeting.
Will we have an opportunity to take a look at the survey?
That's my hope.
Okay.
And just to keep things very healthy and transparent, it would be my hope that we would be able to look at a survey prior to the survey going out. No surprises,
Mm-hmm.
And I think generally with good performance appraisals, there's not really usually a surprise. So just keeping that in mind, either, as a tickler for next time, or if there's anything kind of that's popping into your heads as we're kind of talking about it now. We just want to make sure that we actually get it done this year. It's these things. And if there's nothing coming to mind, I can go ahead and just leave that off. I don't think we need action necessarily tonight unless anyone feels strongly about that.
I did have
Oh,
one thing that's just kind of popping up. Because of, there's so much going on, but there is, again, looking at the org chart, and we've had a lot of changes. I would like, in the survey, leadership skills. How do you think the captain's steering a boat? Don't mean to attack my microphone.
No, this is good. So you want the survey to ask the participants to kind of assess leadership skills for our director.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If there's anything else, bring it to the next meeting. We'll keep this moving forward so it doesn't get lost. And thank you. With that, let's move on to item 4D. Preliminary discussion and possible action regarding the next steps to implement the library strategic plan. And this is something I'll I guess we'll just to jog everybody's memory. This is something I asked last time to just kind of brainstorm about. It's wonderful to be part of a plan. And the planning process, of course, that we've gone through. And the next natural step is implementation. And I think that it's important for us, if we're going to be effective as a board, to really have input into how we think the plan should be implemented. And we asked our director last meeting to kind of help out with summarizing the staff's side as well. So this is really a collaborative effort. I don't want this to feel like it is a top heavy, the board wants this and the board wants that or whatever. At the same time, it's useful for us as a board to go, okay, well, what did we really mean there when we said that goal? What does that actually look like in practice? So I think I had put that bug in everyone's ear last meeting. So this meeting, I want to start with Director Colgrove to kind of give us where he's at with staff, and then we can open up discussion among the trustees.
Thank you, Madam Chair and trustees. What you have before you in this agenda item is a number of pieces of the equation for your consideration. And my hope was that we would have had significantly more here today. But one of the items that has come up several times in conversation tonight is the org chart proper. And I'll throw that out just so that we've got that to set the tone. Right now, or actually 2 days before Christmas, former Access Services Manager Ermel Reinhardt tendered his resignation. He had accepted a position down at Las Vegas Clark County Library District and is no longer with the library. And so as one of the pieces of the equation are these 3 staff positions that were managers previously. A large part of the consensus of the conversation that has been underway among staff already has been reworking those positions potentially, rather than being more vertical organizational structure, instead to get more folks on the front lines that are helping us pull the library forward. I'll point out that those 3 positions were vacant. Also, as of this org chart, you have a number of other positions that were vacant. Senior library assistant, 2 senior library assistants positions, also a librarian position, and a 3rd library assistant position. This org chart is a tiny bit out of date because we've been pedaling as fast and as hard as we can to fill these positions. And I'm glad to be able to report tonight that we filled 2 of those library assistant positions. A 3rd, and both of those hires were, although we went out to open bid nationally, my apologies, we advertised nationally and solicited input, and we had at least 30 applicants coming in for them, and we interviewed 8. 7 of the 8 were outstanding. At the end of the day, the 2 that were hired were in fact the most qualified, in part because they were part-time employees. One of them has been working for the library now for 7 years as a part-time employee and has just now accepted a full-time position. So we're moving forward. Although when you hire someone that's working for you as a part-time staff, it's the right thing, but it's kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So we're filling additional positions then in those part-time workers. Also, we've got another position that we're attempting to fill right now as an internal hire. It would be a promotional event for a staff member that's been with us now for 1.5 years that has really been going above and beyond the call. And we'll see if we'll be able to report that next month. So many of those positions are vacant right now or are in flux. I'll go back to the first item on here that's in the attachment on this table that sums up basically the takeaway from our all-day staff development, where all of the staff got together and we started putting on our thinking caps. What are the things we're doing right, the things that we're doing wrong in the library? What are the things that we need to improve? And all of these are in line with our strategic implementation. So my apologies that the print is so small, but you'll see that staff really stepped up and added a lot into the plate. And these are categorized by broad areas of concern or opportunity. And you'll see the one that just is head and shoulders above the others is just raw technology. All of the staff know full well that this library has a ton of technology that they're not necessarily comfortable with and don't know how to get it going, and have a clear sense that a lot of it is sort of held together with baling wire and duct tape. And so it's a top priority for all of the staff to address questions like how might we increase access to and the support of library technology. Following that one that has no less than 30 bullet points, you've got the next ones are space, basically. The space itself that we have. So 22 different things, limited space. We need better lines of sight. We need to be able to see where things are in the library. There's a lack of space for growth of juvenile fiction. Again, visibility itself, the overall physical appearance of the library. Not enough one-person quiet areas, and so on. Along with study spaces, collaboration rooms, and at the last one, it might help to remove the front benches. These are all things that are on the plate that feed into the equation, followed by programming and access that are both roughly about the same space as 17. So our top priority right out of the gate is focusing on technology along with the space itself. Staff is going to be meeting again for another all-day staff development where we're going to be taking your input and combining it with this and taking it to the next level where we actually start saying, okay, these are the things and these are the date certains and the deliverables. Our hope is that by the time we get to July 1, that we will have this formalized strategic implementation and a lot of the things underway. It should be pointed out, although it isn't clarified in this document, that a number of the things that rose to the very top in our all-day staff development, we prioritized each of them in terms of how much impact do they have and how much effort it takes to achieve it. And so the things that were really high impact, that didn't take much effort, that could be done with just basically the director saying, let's do it that way. We walked away from that meeting with at least 3 wins right out of the gate. We've continued that process. So lines of communication are now very open between staff and administration. And we see that we're pulling on the same rope and we're actively solving things as we're going forward. A case in point that crosses between the org chart being so understaffed right now. Again, a hat tip to the staff that are there because literally with less than half of the staff, we've been keeping the library open. We've been keeping the wheels in contact with the road, and we've been making changes on the fly as we're trying to hire the other positions. In fact, that is why Department of Business Manager Joy Holt isn't able to join us tonight, is because she's right now hosting Storytime. Not Storytime, the book club across the way for the first time in person. Did you have a question, Trustee? Oh, thank you. And so, again, hat tip. My hat is completely off to these staff that are fully engaged. And that is the secret sauce. When we align what staff are there to do, what they love to do, with what we're able to do, we all give 110%, including myself not 2 hours ago solving problems with the technology in the library. So without going sideways, let me pull back to make sure that I'm addressing the other concerns. You also have a copy of the strategic plan linked and copies that are in print if you didn't happen to have one and you'd like to take one with you. Because again, your input tonight and at any point going forward, feel free. If a thought comes to mind, please reach out to me and put the bee in my bonnet so that we can add it into the plate. Just the big picture one, though, I did want to make sure that each of the trustees were aware of. These 3 positions right now that are currently vacant, the Access Services Manager, the Collection Development Manager, and the Creative Learning Manager positions, right now, as staff have been wrapping their minds around it, and as we've been talking about this for these last several months, it's our collective read that we probably don't need to rehire those positions per se. We do need a collections development manager. It's my hope that the person that has been leading collections development in the library for these last many years, in fact, working in hand in glove with former collection development manager Lauder, that we'll be able to offer her a promotion into that position and keep her doing that good work and reward her for doing that good work. But the Access Services Manager position and the Creative Learning Manager positions, it's my read and staff's collective read that what we really need, more importantly than that, is we need a technology coordinator. We need someone in the library that's able to work with us and work with there's between 200 and 300 different computers, laptops, portable devices, fixed things in the library, as well as things that check in and out. We need someone that can help us get out of the weeds. We've got a wide range of software that are out of date, that are obsolete, that aren't being updated, including the security software that has been raised as a matter of concern in front of this board before. So we're actively in conversation with the Human Resources Department and the City Manager's Office to see what would this look like if we were to recast this. If I can talk about the org chart just briefly, this is a department with 14 full-time positions. And literally, when you look at this chart, there were 5 managers and 2 supervisors. That literally is a department where half of the people in it are management. And that is, has been, in my view, unnecessarily top-heavy. I think that we can make much more effective use of it by restructuring this instead to use a much more traditional, you've got a library director and an assistant director, and they're 2 halves of the same coin, and they're pulling on the same rope in the library on the service desk, doing story time, doing book club, working on the equipment that needs to be, and doing outreach and working with the community. If we were to go down that road, we're actively drafting and reworking those position descriptions to make sure that that could reflect it. And then we'll be working with the City Board of Supervisors and Human Resources to see if that's something that they think can also work. The hope with that, again, is to, instead of having a manager in charge of access services and then a manager under that that's in charge of actually the circulation of stuff, we have the person that's in charge of all the circulation of stuff. She's still with us, that's great. Can we take this person and instead try to rework that position into a technology position that can support the library? Similarly, instead of a dedicated creative learning manager, lean on the library director and the deputy director to be the active parties steering all of the staff across the organization in terms of outreach and departmental activities, and pulling from across the departments, which is what we've been doing these last several months. In fact, staff from Access Services, some of them are thrilled to be taking part in collections development and cataloging because that's their art form. It's something they like to do. There are staff in Access Services that are thrilled to be taking part in delivering story time. just like collections development, is also taking part in delivering story time. It's something to do that's a little bright spot during the week, that's outside of the normal routine. Staff are feeling much happier. I've had multiple staff reporting to me that they feel that the environment is much less negative. They feel like that they have direct access now to administration and that the conversation is part of a team effort. So that's moving forward. The other position that I wanted to make sure that the board was aware of, instead of looking at a creative learning manager, instead of thinking of that position as I'm going to class it as probably a workforce development position, but it really is a social worker position. It really is the hybrid that this board has talked about repeatedly about needing. It's someone that can work with the library and with the city and work with the agencies across this city in support of a subset of the community that frankly we don't have a lot of support for. And we're often dodging and weaving and having to call the sheriff's department because we don't know what to do there. Instead, we can recast this and say, we can move this forward. We can help get people gainfully employed in living wage jobs. We can help kids that are in high school find entirely new careers through the Nevada Career Explorer and carry that on to the next steps. And at the same time, a lot of the things that we're doing that would have been called creative learning are really workforce development. It gives us an opportunity to tell the story of the library's outreach and engagement with the community across all age groups as being something that the city cares about, which is keeping people working and learning and earning more tax-paying dollars. And so my apologies if I've gone on at too much length on that, Madam Chair and trustees. But just briefly, just to ice the cake, I've pulled a few slides from the presentation that the University Center for Economic Development had presented previously to reframe them, just to refresh all of our minds about what the refresh of the strategic plan told us. And in summary, the mission was revised to talk about the Carson City Library improves people's lives through relevant, traditional, and innovative means. I added the space in between those two lines because my brain gets a little fuzzy when I get into all of the other words. But to me, the things that we're talking about in terms of reworking the org chart within the building, reworking the services and our focus are all about how does the library improve people's lives through relevant as well as traditional and innovative means. The vision is that the library itself, the Carson City Library, will be a vibrant hub for community engagement, discovery, and learning. It will be much more than just the place where you go to check out your evening's entertainment, right? It's a place where you can connect with your fellow citizens, you can engage in active dialogue, and again, I'm delighted to report that that is already happening in the library. We are having lots of community meetings. We're having lots of engagement within the library, as well as learning as well. It gets better from here. Also, the reworked and prioritized goals. The number one goal from the staff's involvement and from the community's involvement with the University Center for Economic Design in refreshing the strategic plan, the number one goal was operations improvements. How are we going to improve our operations to ensure the smooth delivery of services, programs, and resources to users? Followed by access and comfort improvements. So a big part of our focus, you saw in the input from staff previously, was number one, technology is scary because we don't know what we're going to do if it all of a sudden fails and we can't fix it. Followed by access and comfort improvements. What the community was telling us repeatedly in their input is that the library felt cold and uninviting. Staff didn't feel necessarily very pleasant. They felt not necessarily safe at all times. How are we addressing those? These are real concerns that we're actively working on. Some examples of concerns that are already at the surface. from staff, because again, staff knows what's going on in the library and how we can do it better. They just need to be welcomed to the table, and we're carrying it forward. Something as simple as, we want to engage with kids. We want the age demographic from, from childbirth on into their early to mid-teens to be welcome in the library. Why don't we have any furniture that is the right size for kids of that demographic? Maybe we weren't welcoming them in the past. But by bringing that forward, we're already looking at that and saying, well, how might we rework this? Could we shift it over here? Could we get some of this furniture? We're actively targeting that as a proposal for the Friends going forward in their new plan to be able to retool and more age-appropriate furniture for that demographic. Followed by the goal number 3, which is services, programs, and resources. We are absolutely going to continue to develop and improve the services and programs and resources that we offer. Followed by the facility and space improvements. Again, a lot of the concerns are not just age-appropriate and welcoming and comfortable spaces, but security spaces. Again, line of sight. How can you see what's going on and where it's going on? If you can't see it as staff, then members of the community can't see it when they're coming in either. They intrinsically feel a little more skittish, perhaps, especially if they're already leaning in that direction. And again, just the revised weaknesses, the overall lack of building space, lack of planning, lack of utilization, lack of staff, lack of all of the things. Lack was the overarching theme. But I would circle back and point out, as I have to staff right now, is that this library has been delivering on improved levels of service with less than half of the staff that it had previously. That's a forward step. As we hire on the new staff and we're bringing more engaged staff on board, these feelings are actively changing. And the revised opportunities, again, the staff, the openings of positions, the opportunity for collaboration, these things all come together in a common thread. And I welcome the board's input on this. Finally, I believe the issues in focus for the coming year, the immediate need to address the various staffing challenges that the library currently faces. We are actively trying to figure out, how do we thread this needle going forward? Because we all realize that the answer is not simply to ask for more staff positions from the city when we've done that for the last 5 years and they have not been forthcoming. Instead, we're making more efficient and effective use of the staff positions that we have, while we're keeping the city very firmly in the loop of what we're doing, because when we do that, the city will see that we are in fact delivering on our promise. And then, and only then, I would submit, does it become possible for us to get additional staffing. We're developing these new programs, resources, and services to address these changing needs across the community, vis-a-vis social worker, workforce development. These are very real concerns that we need to be partnering with our community members in the library space to carry forward, while we continue to improve the breadth and depth of the existing and new collaborations and partnerships. Just circling back, one of the things that staff is both thrilled, excited about, and the teeniest bit scared about is our mutual conversation that what we're planning on doing. We've hired the library assistant positions internally, but we've altered how they were working. In the past, it was everyone taking an even slice of the service desk. Instead, what we've done is we've taken the library assistant positions and said, these positions are dedicated to the service desk for the near term. So community coming in will see the same people on the service desk repeatedly. They'll be able to work with them and interact very deeply. And at the same time, that frees up the hours that existing staff had been putting on the service desk to put toward these last 3 pieces of the equation. That is to say, everyone is excited and terrified that when they don't have to be on the service desk anymore, now the things that have been on the back burner that need to get done move forward. And also, we're going to be getting out of the library. We're literally going to be taking the pedal library and coming across the street here to the community center, to the farmers market, to every event that we can find in the community to begin engaging with the community and figure out what the library needs to be for them. We're also going to be taking the maker van out and actively engaging with kids. Primarily, we're focusing through the third quarter of this year on working with kids that are in the middle school to high school age to begin figuring out what the library might be to them, because we don't see them enough in the library, and we can't afford to lose a connection with that part of our community long term. That said, I believe, Madam Chair, that concludes just the overview. The gist of it is that each of these pieces, oh, there is one piece that remains. I did not touch, my apologies, on the library commitments that we have already made that are part of the Carson City strategic plan. And they're across these three categories: efficient government, quality of life, and sustainable infrastructure. Under the heading of implementing best practices, we've committed to perform an in-depth assessment of library space and services to more efficiently provide existing services and better serve the changing needs of the community. That has a delivery date of this year, 2022. And so we will be completing that assessment along with our strategic implementation, because they do go hand in glove. This assessment informs how and what we're doing going forward. Leveraging technology, we'll be expanding efforts to ensure that city employees are aware, and departments are aware of training and career development resources to them through the library. We have nearly 1,000 employees across a broad range of departments. Most of them are not active users of the library. First, we can connect with our fellow city employees and make sure that they're aware. But we can do better than just simply provide the links to the training that they need to do for their human resources. We can provide welcome packets. We can provide tours. We can invite their kids to the library to visit. We can leverage this and carry it forward. The commitment on that is ongoing, because that's just something that is the right thing to be doing. The next step is under the heading, again, of promoting educational, cultural, and recreational opportunities that contribute to the health and well-being. We're going to be enhancing programs and services by expanding outreach efforts to engage directly with the community around the technology, services, and materials available to them. Strengthening the ongoing library engagement efforts at the Boys and Girls Club, and deliberately increasing library outreach and engagement at K-12 school events. That's what I was just talking about in terms of getting the pedal library and the maker van out. That is also ongoing. And our intent, under the heading of developing the sustainable infrastructure, our intent is to increase the physical usage of the physical and the virtual library. And we're shooting for increasing that usage by 20% by the end of next year in 2023. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal, but you don't get 100% of the things that you don't shoot for. And I'm confident we can make a dent in that. Finally, performing the EDGE assessment to identify, and this is again part of reaching out and working with our community where they are, identify what the community infrastructure needs are. The library EDGE assessment, several of you may be familiar with, but the gist of it is to get a sense of where does the Carson City Library fit, where does Carson City proper fit relative to the national and regional averages in terms of Wi-Fi connectivity, technology availability, fundamental infrastructure that the library may be able to contribute to. We don't know where we are right now, and we've committed to have completed that also by 2023, and we'll have that in time for the coming year to incorporate with the strategic implementation plan that will be revised along with the strategic plan. Again, I believe that process begins again as of July 1st. That said, Madam Chair and trustees, I will step back and field any questions that might be forthcoming.
I'll open it up. Any trustees who wants to start? Anybody, any takers?
I think there's been a lot of work that's been put into this. Okay, there's been a lot of work put into this, a lot of thinking. I guess, part of just who I am, a lot of this seems pretty, it seems doable in some ways. There's a lot of, I don't know, what do I want to say? A lot of technology type details that I think are very important. However, I also think that there are opportunities that that the library may be missing by not like having more story hours, having like a family pajama story hour at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and different, more opportunities. Because when I look at the calendar of opportunities on the website, there's not a diverse list of opportunities. And it's my, part, like I said, it's part of me that I want to see the library engaged in a lot of activities that are not necessarily how to use your phone or how to access the internet, because I think a lot of opportunities for people's quality of life have to do with engagement with each other in the community, which doesn't happen necessarily when you're, looking at books for your kids in the Petal Library. There's needs to be interactions within the library that allow people to learn more, to communicate more, to interact more. And like I said, that's kind of just who I am. I'm definitely on the edge, on the side of programming. I don't see enough of the kind of programming that I like, but that doesn't mean that it's the best just because I like it. But I'm not really seeing that. And I can see from your chart here that, there are concerns, and, some of the programming and the technology and the space kind of all go together, but the more programming that is technologically relevant and technologically update, doing more, even doing a virtual story hour that that can, be out there for families that, can't come to the library, or for a daycare center maybe that might be able to do something like that. Or I know it seems to me that, didn't the library do some like virtual craft sessions during COVID? But, continuing even something like that, something that, because I feel very strongly that you have to build your audience, because if you want people to continue to use the library when they're 25, they've got to have used it when they're 5. and they've got to have used it when they're 8 and when they're 12. So the number of opportunities has to be broad, and I know that you've been hampered by staff. Um, and that's just kind of what I would like to see more in terms of, I've looked at your strategic plan on the website, and, it's very nice, very well done. I'd like to see more of a chart that says specific goals and and what they relate to in terms of the strategic goals, and when they can be accomplished. A firm date, or a fairly firm date, a date that is possible, and then maybe even a column that says who's responsible for making sure that gets accomplished. I mean, in the here's under the goal of operations improvements. Some of the bullet points are a little nebulous, but provide relevant and progressive programming and learning opportunities by recruiting and hiring more educators, teachers, technology information specialists, and marketing professionals. Well, can you put a date on that? I mean, can you say that's going to be done by, we're going to hire, one teacher or one technology professional by a certain date, and this is how we're going to do it? I'll stop talking now. I'll let somebody else talk for a while.
Any other trustees want to jump in here?
Well, I'm really glad you started this conversation, because I was a little afraid to start the conversation because I'm kind of in the same mind you are. So but I want to start by saying I think the security is very important. When we talk about technology, I think the top of it is the security software. So I want to set that aside for a second, because that's very important. But I agree, as much as I love technology and I understand the need for the free Wi-Fi. We've talked about this. We all know that there is a need out there. We know there's a need for people to be able to use the laptops. But I'm looking at this, and we have so many needs. If this was just really all we needed was technology, then I don't have a problem with it being the largest, but I kind of have a problem with it being the largest because, as you say, getting somebody in that door, making them comfortable, is the first thing we need to be thinking of. Because if you don't make the spaces for them to use the technology, why are we concerning ourselves with technology? So again, but I understand it. So I think the space and the programming really need to go together. And I agree that I think we need to be a little more adaptive with our programming. But I love the idea of the kids' furniture, but I don't see the space. We've talked about this before. I don't know where that space would be, where parents would. I'm putting myself, as a parent whose kid grew up here. I'm not sure right now where that safe space is. So again, I think we need to be talking about our space and how we define that in line of sight and all of that. But and having said that, I also want to commend you guys for you're doing an amazing job. And I don't want to take anything away from that. So, but I just have to voice that. And I had two thoughts come into my head when we were talking about like a virtual story hour. One of the things that saved my sanity during COVID was YouTube. And I do Pilates at home with YouTube. And I know the Carson City Park and Rec did yoga. And you could do that on YouTube. I'm wondering if the library has a YouTube channel. And if not, I'd help you develop that. What if we did virtual story, like story hour? And that would be one way of introducing the library to a whole new group of people. And I'm thinking kind of like Reading Rainbow, like the Carson City Reading Rainbow on YouTube. I think something like that, that would definitely help. Because I know right now we have COVID. Yes, it would be nice to have, story hour, pajama hour, and family hour. And I was thinking, wow, movie night or something, but with COVID, we still have to be really careful of how many people we bring in the library. So we do still have constraints. So that's why I was thinking that. And I'm not speaking for anybody else, I'm just speaking for myself, but if you need volunteers, if you want to do special programming on the weekends or on the evenings, I'm hoping that we are able to volunteer, and I'm definitely volunteering myself to, call me up and say, hey, we need someone to, read story hour today. Can you come in? Yes. I mean, use the resources that you have. Please reach out and use the resources. Because you are short-staffed, and I know what it's like to work short-staffed. So, and again, I do commend you and your staff for doing an amazing job with what you have. Thank you.
Any other trustees want to jump in? I'm looking at Trustee Lucas, but I'm also looking through the phone at Vice Chair Cranston.
Well, I'll just add some more.
Sure.
I just think that in line with what is already in the library and able to work with, I think that the lack of the makerspace is just a huge hole. It's a huge hole. And I know that it's difficult, again, with reduced staff. But, if it were open 1 or 2 late afternoons, early evenings or something where you could really, you're going to have to start getting people enthused about it all over again, which means it doesn't just involve someone who's going to be there helping, it involves some outreach and promotion as well. But I will say also that it concerns me, okay, I'm a professional librarian. I have a master's degree in library science. I like to see libraries that have librarian staff. And they don't all have to be managers, but I think that professional librarians with experience, and maybe even new ones, bring their professional expertise to the table that someone who has worked in the library for 10 years doesn't have, because they have not, I don't want to sound, elitist or anything, but they have not, they haven't had the opportunity. Maybe they don't have the ideas, maybe they don't have the background. For whatever reason, they're not necessarily, and I don't even know who we're talking about by name. So I'm not pointing out anybody in specific, but I do believe that if you have, right now you've got 3 major vacancies. If you make one of them a technology person and one of them a social worker, that means you only have one other librarian. And I don't think that this library will reach the heights that we want it to unless you have some additional professional library input.
I have actually a question on that. So, in library world, because y'all are the experts, not me, do specializations exist for someone who might be like masters in library sciences, but also technologically minded?
Absolutely.
Or is that so? So that necessarily wouldn't be an either or, right? It wouldn't
Right.
be either hire the librarian or hire some technology guru type person. You could potentially find that overlapping skill set.
Yes.
Okay.
And I must admit I've never seen the job description, the job position descriptions. I don't know what's being asked for. I don't know if when you're having positions that are open, if you're saying they have to have a library degree or they need library experience. I think sometimes it's good to bring people from the outside in. I think it can be a great opportunity for someone who's already on the inside to be promoted or to move from a part-time to a full-time position when it's the right person. But I do believe that it's important also, particularly when you have so many open positions, that perhaps someone from the outside, which, is a little risky, it's a little riskier, but sometimes that can be like, maybe, I don't really want to call it a breath of fresh air because that's not necessarily what I'm talking about, but just a different perspective, a different way of looking at things, a different, different background that can say, well, I've had experience with this and this really worked. And, did you think about this or something? But that's kind of where I am right now.
And if I may, Madam Chair, through you to Trustee Markle, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. I'm a longtime advocate and firm believer in professional development specifically. So I was just looking over the org chart here. As it stands right now, again, even though what I'm counting is 1, 2, 3 MLS holders and 1 archivist over there right now. So 4 people and she was, and with 2 more, I would count, because one of the positions that's currently vacant is a librarian position that does require the MLS, so that brings it up to 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be at least 5 full-time MLS holders, which is an astonishing ratio out of 14.
Yes.
It's probably 2 to 3 times higher than any other public library in the state, for sure. And you're absolutely right. When we go to hire these, we're deliberately opening them up nationwide because I firmly believe bringing in from the outside if we can. But if the most qualified candidates are ones that are already with the library, they should be the ones hired. What needs to get layered on top of this, though, is, and I'm sure I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but to put a finer tip on it, in the city manager's update meeting a day before yesterday, we were advised that as of right now, in this moment in time, there are literally 4.5 million fewer people in the workforce than there were before COVID, and there are nearly twice as many openings as there were. And so all of us are really, really wrestling with trying to get these hires. But I'm confident that we will get these hires. And you're right. And exactly to your point with the technology person, there's a position that's open right now for the Salt Lake City Library that is exactly the sort of thing. It's part of the model. It's a technology librarian. But really, when you think about it, I don't mean to confuse the issue by saying technology is just the laptops or the mobile devices. The fact of the matter is that the Carson City Library can get away with only 14 full-time staff while circulating well over 500,000 books every year because of technology. It's because we have self-check kiosks and we have the automated materials handler that check things back in and sort it all out and do collectively the work of 3 more staff. And so while that's great, if that technology stops working, we don't have the 3 additional staff to sort all the books and make sure that they go on the shelves and get them checked in and out. So that's a big part of the fear that you hear. It's not just the computers, and the computers are very heavily used in the library, but it really is the what if, and this is part of what I was solving for even earlier today. It's like, oops, in Visionware, that we use to check things in, we use Polaris, but it also works with the gates and does the checking in, and it's not working anymore. Why did it stop working? Oh, someone rebooted the computer and it's not working. Well, let's solve for it. Thankfully I was able to help solve for that, but boy, I'm reminded, Trustee Cranston will correct me if I get this wrong, but I remember seeing one of Murphy's laws as being, when it has to do with IT, is that if builders built buildings the way that programmers write programs, the first woodpecker to come along would destroy civilization. and And we're kind of in that realm because a lot of our technology counts on software that's already a little bit rickety, and it's on technology that's a whole lot more rickety, computers that are 10 years old or older. And the software licenses are expired, but we're just finding them out as we trip across it and things stop working. It really is a priority to begin pulling those threads together. And the good news is, we can hire a librarian that has those skills. It's a very particular kind of librarian, but they exist out in the wild. And if we can find them and bring them on board, that will be a win. And again, I couldn't agree more with the input that each of you has offered, and especially the offer to volunteer as well. We will get that table will be part of the strategic implementation. That's exactly how we do it. We need to figure out what we're doing first, and then how are we doing it, and then who's on the hook for it, and how do we carry it forward. And you saw me over here furiously writing notes as you were offering your input. That goes right into the pot, right? That's how we incorporate this and we carry it forward. And I could not agree more about the library as being one of the last places in the community where you can interact with your fellow citizens, where you can build those relationships. That's part of what's critical path in having these events. Not just story time, but pajama story time and Legos and all of that fits together as part of a pipeline that we're actively trying to wrap our minds around from 6 months ago into a year and a half from now, so that we've actually got this whole pipeline sussed out and staffed up and being delivered with staff that are excited about doing it. And as we begin to do that, then the library comes to life. That does fit 100% together with things like capital improvement requests to the city to say, well, if we're going to do this, we kind of need to be able to open this space up or to change this out. And we begin the process of finding the nickels and dimes that it takes to get that work done. And it is really all about, and my apologies in my presentation that I may have given it short shrift, talking about the things that the library already does really, really well. We do an amazing job with our traditional print collections, and we've been ramping up our electronic collections, and folks make heavy, heavy use of those resources. Rule number one is don't break it don't fix it if it isn't broken, right? And so we're trying real hard not to break those things that we're doing good while we're focusing on these other things. And you're right, to get these active community events happening in the library. We just have not been in a spot for the last couple of months where we've been able to do that. We have held together, though. Story time has been convening. We've been having story time every week. Lego Club happening. Tonight is the first time that the book club has been back together in the library in person. We're in the process of rebooting that as well to include virtual participation. And Trustee Nichols, you're absolutely right. With the YouTube channel and including a lot of this content in there, not only can we have these events be, by including the virtual participation, although clearly the ball got dropped in this meeting tonight for that, by including the ability to participate virtually, we're being inclusive in a way that the library hasn't been able to in the past. And we can do that. We can do that with technology. Part of what's challenging it right now is that we just don't have it together yet. You know, we're operating with, again, between a third to a half of our staffing, and we're doing a lot better. And over the course of the next 2 to 4 weeks, I expect to see substantially more resources starting to open up. Over the course of the next 1 to 3 months, even more. And the key to all of that is that to the extent that you can share your thoughts and input with Chair Knight or with me directly, it's from your lips to God's ears, right? This goes directly into the conversation that we're having. And we can, because what we have here is really an overlay of what the staff sees with what the community says that they want, with what we've already committed to the city. And so those three, when we hold them up this way, then the board can say, this is exactly what we need to be prioritizing and where we need to go with it. So I've held this mic open for too long, Chair Knight. My apologies for being so long-winded.
That's all right. I'm about to get even more long-winded. We're good. So I have more questions for you. But to piggyback on the other trustees' remarks, I do fear that what you presented tonight is very, very detailed, very well thought through. I can tell, but it does sound like a plan for a plan, which is not the direction we want you going in. So what we do, I think it's been made pretty clear. I think what we're looking for more something more specific with a firm-ish date and who's going to be the leader of the project. And I think this gives you another opportunity as a manager, as a director, to make appropriate work assignments for all the staff, right? Who within the scope of their regular duties, right? We're not asking anybody to work out of their assignment or out of their class, but that everybody has some piece that they own, right? So it could be, more responsibility, more higher level positions, probably take on larger projects, but even the low hanging fruit, the smaller things that just have to get done, give that to somebody, empower your staff, and have them be the owners of that. And I think that extending that little bit of trust goes a really long way, So it sounds like we have just that little bit of a course correction, right? So we want to see a chart, a different kind of chart. So that's good. But I did also want to just confirm with you what you've provided so far with these different categories based on the staff development day. What was the date of that staff development day? Was that the one in August, or was that?
We only do it quarterly.
Okay.
But August would have been the time for August or September.
Okay. So it kind of feels like I don't want these things getting stale is really what I'm getting at there. So I don't know if I need the exact date, but that's the deal.
My apologies. You're precisely right, Madam Chair. And in fact, that's why the next all staff development where we're focusing on that is literally, it's less than 2 weeks from now. It was taking this to the board, getting your input, and then going back to the team for the next steps.
And I mean, even as you're developing whatever that chart is going to be for us going forward, you can go back from that previous date and go, okay, here's the stuff that we've already done. And you can say the date that was completed as well, to just kind of give an idea of like, look, it's not like this crazy daunting task. There's stuff you've already done, which I think might also help kind of get staff, they sound already very motivated. So to keep that motivation moving forward. One piece that I would add, though, when we're talking about K-12 engagement, I love the idea of the library going out and being involved in schools and on site and all the rest. But if you want to bring that population into the library, you really need to address transportation. As much as parents might trust the library, might trust the programs, they know that there's adults around, they know that there's some level of supervision that happens inside the library walls, getting to the library isn't always feasible for parents, especially parents who are working. So if they're relying on transportation of one kind or another that gets their student or their child from school to home, then if there's a way to intercept that to say, well, we'll get you from school, after school for a couple hours to the library and then get you home, or you can come pick us up at the library. Either way, that transportation piece is really going to be critical. So one way or another, as you're making those plans around K-12 engagement, just to keep in mind, I would be just so thrilled to see some type of transportation plan that involves bringing students from school, after school, into the library, of course, when it's safe to do so and everything is sanitized. So that's just a note that I made there. I thought it was interesting here under programming that we want to see more support for Spanish-speaking ELL programs. Then later on, we have this Spanish practice club, which sounds kind of like it's language practice, right? So why not have an English practice club too? And I can tell you, years ago, WNC used to have a telephone conversation partner program they used to do with volunteers. I was a volunteer. It was a lovely program. Whoever you task with leading that connection might want to reach out to them and ask about how they did their program. That would be a pretty easy thing to do virtually, or at least you don't have to be face to face. You could do it using laptops or a telephone to practice whatever language you want to be practicing. But just one thing that came to mind. And then I want to make sure that I have this super, super clear. So in terms of the vacancies, well, actually, no, let me finish this thought first. So what I gathered from the rest of the trustees talking is pajama story hour. We loved pajama story hour. How soon do you think we can get pajama story hour to actually happen, whether that's virtual or in person or some version of both? Like, is that something I could be hearing about in the next meeting?
Pardon me, Todd Colgrove, Madam Chair. I think that's entirely possible. I believe that that's not a commitment. That's in the realm of what might begin happening in the next 1 to 3 months. Although what I want to avoid is exactly when I hired into this library, what I heard from every member of the staff is how overwhelmed and overloaded they were with all the things and couldn't possibly get the critical path pieces done first. I'm consciously holding back on implementing some of these things right out of the gate because we need to do the critical path pieces first. That said, if a pajama story time is something that we might well be able to implement within the next 1 to 3 months.
And more from what I heard in the conversation, and actually this goes back to another meeting, you didn't bring it up tonight, it was picnic table, chessboard, something or other. Yeah. If you want to turn your microphone on so Trustee Cranston can hear you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Picnic table in further away from the door. I know somebody mentioned removing the benches from the front door area. I know that just removing the benches isn't going to really solve a problem. Moving them to a place that's a little bit further away may help address a security issue that people are feeling unsafe. So I would like to have some kind of report on, if you've talked to Parks and Rec about a picnic table that can be further down the grassy area, and of course, a chessboard table. Which, somebody's going to have to do some research and see what it's going to cost to have a chessboard table, I'm sure.
What do we think a reasonable timeline on something like that would be?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This, when it was discussed by the board at the last time the topic came up, I had brought to the board a nominal price quote that it would take to remove the benches, but the request was made to go back and consult with the different federal and local agencies, and there just simply has not been bandwidth. That has not happened. I have no clear sense of how much time that would take. I can say, though, that request was amplified even earlier today when I had 3 FBI agents come into the library because of the bank robbery that happened down the way, wanting to look at the video camera footage that we had. And the very first words out of his mouth were, "Dude, you might want to get rid of those benches out front there because they might as well just pitch a tent." And I said, "This is something that's on the table that we're actively considering." And I couldn't agree more. This is something that we need to work with. The words that certainly Department Business Manager Holt has heard repeatedly from me over the last several months has been, we need to crawl before we walk, and we need to walk before we run, but we will get to the point where we're running. And this will go right back into the hopper. I will to your point, Madam Chair, and you're absolutely right. This is part of why staff morale has been going up so much, is because it is a case of what are they interested in? What are they engaged in? Can we, here, take that ball and run with it, and then I'll follow up next week. Let's see where we're at. Let's keep it going forward. I will actively be keeping an eye out for staff that see this as a particular issue and see if they want to bird dog that and reach out to the federal agencies so that we can pull that together as a larger proposal and bring it back to the board for its review. Because it is very near the top of the priority list.
Thank you for that. Next on what I heard just in the conversation, virtual story hour or YouTube's YouTube channel, and then interfacing some type of virtual story hour. If you don't do it live, if you do those recordings, it is turned into more of like a local reading rainbow, which I love that comparison. That sounds amazing. I know that in childcare facilities, they are allowed it for certain age groups, a small, but there is allowable time for screen time. So if that's something that outreach could be conducted once that's up and running, and I realize that that's not like a tomorrow thing, but just something to kind of keep in mind as you are building it, thinking about the audience first. And if it's something that's really easy, like, hey, here's the link. We've already got a bunch of recordings out there. Maybe incorporate that into whatever, minimal screen time that the childcare facility is allowed to do. Again, it depends on the age group. But that's particularly powerful to me because you've got a potential for kids who don't know each other, who attend different centers, to meet later in school here and have something in common already. Which goes right back to that community building piece. So that's, just something to keep in mind as you're moving forward. I don't know if you would have a clear idea on maybe a timeline for having that either stood up or at least somebody designated to work on it. What do you think?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The devil's in some of the details. What I was writing notes here is that in terms of a timeline to set this up so that virtual story time can be available, that can also be in the relatively near-term timeframe. I mean, it's not rocket science. Basically, it's a laptop and a video camera and a microphone. That said, it was enough of a challenge, enough of a barrier, because although librarians and library staff are technologists, if you're juggling story time, it's hard to do that while you're also juggling a laptop and a camera and a microphone. And so just as soon as we can get some staff up to date, we may be able to prototype and test a setup where it could just be plug and play. But we're not there. We're not there yet. I could imagine that within a 1 to 3 month time frame, we may be able to have the virtual access side of Storytime up and running. Longer term, engaging with the parents and the community members and getting them into the virtual channel, that's another thing that'll take some time. But part of the equation, the more challenging part, and this is where District Attorney Woodbury will perhaps raise some concern, is when we go into the YouTube realm of things and we're trying to record this content and make it available after the fact. Because then all of a sudden we need releases from participants, including the authors of the books whose stories we read. And we may be able to leverage when we get to that point, and we won't get to that point until we have a technologist that can help us really hammer out those software details. We may be able to address that through the lens of fair use by limiting who has access to it. Maybe it's just not an open YouTube channel. Maybe they need to have a library card and be a member of a very limited group. We're not just making this available to everyone across the world. And I really am not the right person to be able to speak to the possibilities of that. But we can certainly have interactive live participation of it up and running sooner rather than later. Again, in a 1 to 3 month time frame. Ideally, within 6 months, then it's pretty streamlined, and it's actually just part of what we do. What I'd like to do would be to pull that together so that how we're doing this with story time is the same way that we're doing it with maybe Lego Club, and it's the same way that we do it with our weird science STEM activities or art night out. It's basically a rolling kit, and this is just how we do it, but we don't have that kit developed yet.
Trustee Lucas, for the record, I'm just thinking about the actual logistics of a virtual story time, and I'm thinking, in order to make this something that somebody wants to actually log into or watch after it's been recorded, I mean, that's going to be a little challenging. As a mom who used to take my kids to story time, you're going to have someone reading who's really, I would say, animated and interesting, because if you're not there in person, there's like another level of disconnect. Just having someone read a story on a camera probably isn't going to really be draw people in. And then, you're thinking about like, well, you're holding the book in front of them, and for the children that are sitting right in front of you, they can see the pictures. But then if the book is then a small blob in the larger TV screen, and then that's not very big, I think the pictures for the little guys, that's a critical piece of story, of the story. So I think it will be challenging to translate in-person story time to a digital remote format in a way that is actually enjoyable and that people want to participate in. So I think it might be more involved than just getting the camera to work. I can see it being a little challenging. That doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it, but
There's a video editing component there that needs to
yeah,
be
I think that there's
keeping
more
engaging.
to it than just setting up a Zoom camera.
There's also, libraries are part of a large community of libraries across the country. And there are best practices. There's, from the Public Library Association or School Library Association, there are ideas and, things that different libraries have done. I mean, even, we've got a library here in Washoe County that's doing really fabulous stuff right now. And I don't want to, we're not necessarily little Washoe County, we're Carson City, but they've managed to accomplish some things that, maybe when you look at what they're doing, you can figure out how to implement some things that, may seem complicated.
And I agree, and I think it's best practices, but I think it's also trial and error, because I don't picture somebody with a camera that's filming the kids, because that horrifies me.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is the camera. So let's say I'm reading the story to the kids. The camera's not back here. The camera's actually in front of the kids, so that they're getting the storyteller. Then you can kind of zoom in on the book, but you're not. I mean, you can hear the kids, but you're not seeing anybody's faces that certainly don't need to be on YouTube. And I think that would also probably help YouTube. I mean, sorry, I know a lot about YouTube, but they are pretty specific when it comes to kids and kid content and what you can put on there. And I think taking that away so you don't see the kids, I think would also definitely help. And Jason would probably sleep better at night.
Well, I can't wait to see your first video, Trustee Nichols. I'm excited about it. I mean that. I love that you're volunteering, and you're an incredible asset. And I want to just real quickly go back to what you actually mentioned as top of your list being security. And so back to Director Colgrove, how soon do you think we can address those concerns?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those concerns have been at the top of mind for these last 6 months, and we are already addressing those concerns. We have renewed and re-upped our licensing for the Phoronix Deep Freeze software. We're already working with the city IT to address how we can implement those features on the new workstations that are coming into the library and remediate others that are in the library but perhaps not being addressed. So I guess I would say that's already underway right now. We have one person within City IT that we're in the process of actually trying to get the permission through the city to be able to hire that person as a manpower employee to really focus on nailing down a lot of the nitty-gritty critical path details, because I'm not that person. And if we can, my expectation is that within the next, again, in between now and 2 to 3 months from now, the big, scary, hairy details up at the top of the list will have been buttoned down. And that person will also be able to work with us and help inform what job description, what skills are going to be needed in this technology librarian, rather than just counting on my insight and pulling job descriptions from other libraries around the country. What are the hyperlocal details that they need to know? And part of the reason for this conversation that, as I say, has been ongoing now for a couple of months with the city IT department, is to make sure that the city sees that its concerns are also being addressed and reflected, because we work hand in glove.
It almost sounds like a damage assessment. So you want to bring on someone who can tell you how big is big and how bad is bad, and then at that point hire this tech librarian.
That is precisely it. Well, thank you for condensing that, Madam Chair. That's exactly it.
All right. And two more from the discussion, and then I'll move on to vacancies. So, makerspace. I just have it circled. Makerspace. What's going on with the makerspace? How soon can we have that back and up at some version of its former glory?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That the hope from the previous several meetings was to have brought some of the makerspace equipment out by the service desk. That was met with some resistance. That resistance is now gone, but so are the staff. We're in the process of actually figuring out how to do that again. I'm happy to announce that we have a shiny Cricut machine that we were hoping to have out there as part of the makerspace in the early part of December. It will be out there within the next month, along with probably more than one of the 3D printers. But it's basically, and that's one of the hires that we have of the library assistant is someone who is very skilled with the makerspace equipment. And so we'll be bringing that out and working with that employee to make sure that the other staff are getting comfortable with it, because we're going to be introducing that. So the makerspace equipment will be coming to life out on the floor next to the service desk to the extent that we can for right now. The conversations that staff have had with the makerspace is that have ranged from, well, they have evolved from, it would be great if we could get the city to give us another position so we could hire someone we could just put them down there behind the closed door and call it a solved problem, because go down there, that's who's going to help you. To, that's probably not going to happen in the near term. Let's bring it out. Maybe we can get someone that can help us get comfortable with supporting a little bit of the equipment that we've got and get it up and running and engaging with the community while we reimagine the spaces that we have within the library. It may be that longer term, as some of our community advocates have hoped for, that maybe we can have an entire large walled off area with lots of buzzing, loud, noise-making pieces of equipment and lots of safety glasses on board. But I'm not convinced that we even need that right out of the gate. I think what we need right now is to get the equipment that we have up and running and engaging with the community, because more than anything, I see the makerspace equipment as being a gateway technology. It's a gateway to engaging more deeply with the rest of the library and the other services that we have. And it's also a gateway to help support folks with new ideas and innovations that they're trying to springboard. Both of those are very solid traditional library services that we can offer. And we'll be able to do that without having a dedicated space in the near term, which may offer the opportunity, one of the conversations that staff have had when, in some depth, is was harking back to when the area where the makerspace is right now used to be the children's area, and that's where story time was, and it was very active. But they don't want to go back to that. Instead, they're saying, what if the children's area were right next to the service desk in that corner area? You can have a big archway, and it can be sort of magical and fun for kids to come in there and engage, and they can be kind of noisy. But then down the hall in the area that's the makerspace, what if that were kind of a re-engaged for the teens that are coming in, where they kind of want to be not in an area necessarily where the children are, but they still want to be engaging. And so we're actively exploring that and wondering if we might be able to do that with just adding another camera that staff can access, so that we've got eyes on what's going on in this remote area. And then they can have a semi-private area that's part of the library where very specific events can be going that are focused more on the middle school to teenage kids. That's about the gist of the conversation right now with the makerspace.
And that actually takes me, thank you, that actually takes me to the last point that I pulled from our conversation. That involves where we're addressing making the library a more welcoming space, and that does include programming. So I know that you gave us actually pretty good detailed summary, as you always do, of where staff had kind of brainstormed a little bit about correcting for line of sights and maybe moving some shelves around. And where is that conversation now?
My apologies for not turning on the microphone. That conversation is about to be picked up in earnest again. Where the conversation was left off was basically with the realization that it's a big project, unbolting and shifting lots of library shelves, and we need to have a much clearer sense of where we're going space-wise. So what we're doing within the next couple of weeks is bringing that up again while we're focusing more on the children's area, the story time, the juvenile fiction that are already problem issues that have been addressed, bringing those back to the front of mind while and I can be more clear on this, that we're expecting that by the beginning of March that we will be actively doing outreach and engagement with the middle school to high school demographic in a very focused way. We're actually, you're familiar with Professor Daly, who had given you a presentation before. We're anticipating bringing him on board to work actively with staff who are a little more freed up from the service desk, including myself, to be engaging with that demographic and trying to figure out what the library might be to them that it isn't right now. So in terms of timing, the lines of sight, what we're doing is the things that we can change that are going to be relatively nominal, that might just be moving some of the portable displays and the sound booth and opening things up. Those are things that we will be doing over the course of the next 1 to 3 months. Things that are going to involve literally unbolting shelves and moving entire shelf ranges, potentially adding new shelves, realigning them, are things that we're going to be sussing out and then trying to get price quotes on and timing on, because they may need to be lined out over the course of 1 to 2 to 3 years. Because if it's a substantial expense, if we have to buy $100,000 in shelving to make it happen, then we have to go back to the city and see if we can find those monies or the friends or a combination thereof to make it happen. I don't suspect that we'll have to do that. But we'll know more. It's my anticipation, Madam Chair, that by the time we get to the July meeting of this board, that we'll have a fairly detailed, including quotes with the timelines and the tables and who's delivering on them for this board's consideration again, and fine tuning to prioritize and shift things one way or the other. As it stands right now, we're just focusing on keeping the wheels on the bus and rolling down the road. But over the course of the next 1 to 3 months, it starts ramping up again.
I just want to add that I think another way to engage the community as you're thinking about all these different spaces, and I'm just going to go for the record, I don't really like the idea of the makerspace right there, but I'm a book reader. I like to go in and be able to think about the book I'm going to take out. But what about coming up with different plans, different spaces, and having it, printed out, like, I don't know, an architect firm or something, or somebody who's really good at drawing, not me, but, and have it out there and ask the public, what do you think? What do you think, right? As a parent, where do you like the idea of the children's section going right here? Or would you rather see it over here? But engage the community so that when we do all of this, they'll feel like they had a say in it.
If I may, Madam Chair, through you to Trustee Nichols, thank you for that input. That is precisely what we need to do. As you were describing that, my immediate knee-jerk reaction was to say, well, where might we put it? What would work better? How would that work? Should we have it? And that really is the conversation that I'm hoping to kickstart with our community proper. Now that the proper place, of course, was to kickstart the conversation with this board. But from this board, then to take it to the community and bring that input and make sure that they see their input reflected in the library.
It's a good ad. I'm going to thank you for that, Trustee Nichols. So I was wrapping up here what we were talking about, a prettier chart. I'm going to call it a work list, right? These are the actual lists of things we need to see y'all work through, which is getting specific on tasks, giving us some type of timeline, giving us who's leading the effort, and being able to answer, if you haven't put it on the list or on the chart, what complete means. Because some of this stuff feels kind of ongoing. So how do you know you've actually accomplished the thing? So taking all that together, did I just hear you say you won't feel like you'll have that list or that chart prepared until July?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my expectation that by July, when we begin the refresh of the strategic plan a second time, that we will have a pretty solid strategic implementation plan, which is to say that we'll have gone through, I would anticipate, a couple of iterations with the board by then. To be crystal clear, I also haven't mentioned, but that we've been working with to bring on board a consultant who is very familiar with the library already, but is skilled at exactly this sort of effort of pulling together the tasks and nailing it down, and making sure that that person is able to work with management and with the staff to pull these threads together and make sure that the iterations are there. The person that I was hoping to work with is right now in the process of retiring from the state. And so it's probably going to be another month before we stand a chance of bringing that person on board to begin this in earnest. But it's my hope that that will really accelerate the whole effort. So rather than having to wait until we get all of the staff hired and the positions reworked before we can map this stuff out, to actually be able to be running in parallel all of these things. So answering your question more clearly, no, what you heard me say is that what I meant to say is that by July, you'll have a pretty finalized strategic implementation that will itself be getting revised along with the strategic plan in the coming year. But that plan will be pretty solid and reflect a lot of the input that we already have from the community and input that we're beginning to get from the community. The particular details may well shift and projects might morph from July into August because we'll be getting more input from the K-12, middle school through 12. But the overarching structure of what's happening, I think, will be pretty solid by July.
Okay, so have these clear in my head. When you were saying strategic implementation plan, is that the thing that Trustee Markle is talking about in terms of a chart that says who's doing what and by when? Okay.
Precisely, Madam Chair. When I'm saying strategic implementation, the strategic plan is the thing that tells us where we want to go. The strategic implementation is how do we get there? And that literally is what are the things that we're doing? Who's on the hook for them? When is it going to happen? What are the concrete deliverables by whom and by when? And those are the things that too often, it's the 80-20 rule, right? The 80% of the effort goes into the strategic plan. Most organizations never put in the other 80% of the effort that it takes to complete the circle. And that's precisely where we've been for these last 4 months, is in the front parts of that investment. And I want to thank the trustees and the community for its engagement in making that a reality.
So that's for July. What would be reasonable to expect by next meeting? Is it a draft? It's okay if it's not complete, but I kind of want to see something more material.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is exactly the hope. That is exactly the hope. It was my hope to have had even a more complete draft for you at this meeting. Unfortunately, it would really have been a choice of keeping the library open more and having that draft or not. And I opted in the direction of keeping the library open as open as we could while we move this forward. But it's my fault. It's my responsibility that isn't here more complete for you today.
Well, that tracks. I just want to make sure that we keep this on the agenda for next meeting, that we see some type of a draft. Again, does not have to be complete, but to just for us to keep track of this. And if you're feeling like really it's not going to be as workable or in the state that you want it to be in by July, okay, but between now and July, we still need to see some sort of progression there. So to have something to share next meeting, I think would be my request. Does that?
This is Trustee Markle. I agree with you. I think we need something. I think we also need some, we need some benchmarks that can occur before the 1st of July.
Mm-hmm.
If we have some sort of tentative or draft by the next meeting in February, I think I would like to see some things, maybe 3 or 4 things, that could be accomplished in 3 or 4 months after the end of February. So, far before the 1st of July, because I think we're hopefully, we're getting out of COVID. I think that we need to start moving ahead in a more deliberate manner that is, sort of visible to all of us, to us and to the community.
So that I'm clear, next meeting, same agenda item, we will check it back in. We want to see some kind of draft. Is that more or less where we are? Okay.
A draft that includes 3 or 4 benchmark items that could be accomplished before the
Before July?
Yeah.
Does that sound reasonable, trustees?
fine.
I don't know. I just keep thinking, don't we need to hire people? And don't we need to? And don't we need to? And don't
Yes.
we need to?
Well, I was actually, that's my next piece. I wanted to kind of button up the work list or the chart or the plan, the implementation plan before we get there. But here we are there. Thank you. So again, to clarify, it sounds like the access services manager position is the position you'd like to rework into a technology librarian position. Okay. And that the creative learning manager would then become a workforce development librarian or social work. I realize that library social workers are an incredibly emergent field, but I did learn about them at an ALA conference, so they're on somebody's radar. So that sounds like that's a clean, one for one. But then I did hear you bring about the concept of a deputy director or an assistant manager or whatever it is we're calling it. And I think part of this conversation was from previous meetings where in practice, you have a structure now where there are instances where one manager reports to another manager and not to you for certain tasks. And so to take those certain tasks and roll them into a assistant or deputy director position takes away that tension from a peer-to-peer review on a task where we're peers, but I'm asking your permission for something, and it seems to have created tension in the past. So where do we think that position's coming from?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those conversations are ongoing. And I hesitate to say the answer is that it depends, but it kind of depends. It's really in the realm of I'm actively working with Department Business Manager Holt and with Human Resources staff to recraft these things. And part of it is that it's not a budgetary concern because overall we're already budgeted largely for it. But some of these changes, when we're reclassifying a position, engage other parts of the city machinery. And so some of these may require waiting until after July 1, when the city's budget goes back and these position requests go to the Board of Supervisors for their input. But I simply don't know yet. Where we're at with that is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the very critical path pieces, I believe, is the collection development management. That is a function that has been being performed very well by a longstanding member of the staff.
But that position would be being reclassed, right?
If the question is, are we able to ensure that continues by hiring that person into an existing manager position? Or do we keep her where she's at by paying a long-term overload and then reclassify the existing position that's there? In other words, it's sort of, do we take one of the positions and turn it into a technology coordinator, take another position and turn it into a workforce development / social worker position, and then the third position, do we take that one and turn it into a deputy or an assistant director position? And if that's the case, then the other question is, who hires into it? When we open that up nationally, things that I shouldn't say on the record, but I think this library would be remarkably well served if we could encourage or arm twist our current department business manager to throw a hat in the ring. Because I firmly believe that she's probably one of the most nationally qualified for it. But if she did do that, and if she were the most qualified and got hired into it, then there's another question: what do we do with the department business manager? Because one of the reasons why Department Business Manager Holt would be so good at it is because she could do both. And then we could repurpose that position for something else. But if she doesn't hire into it and all you have is a deputy director position, then we have to maintain both. So it's kind of, hiring one position and then another and see where that shifts. And then we change the other positions beyond it with an overlay of, if we're reclassing one of these, it would absolutely, getting to a deputy position would absolutely require reclassifying and going to the Board of Supervisors. Whereas reskinning access services manager as a technology coordinator, that's something that could probably be done in the next month. And so I'm targeting getting those ones done and across the finish line while we come back and look at the longer term ones. But overall, those positions may well take, it may be 6 to 8 months before those positions are finalized. And if I may, you're absolutely right when you referred to the managers reporting to the managers. Honestly, the structure of this, when I hired in, we literally had staff that reported to supervisors, that reported to managers, that reported to another manager, that then finally reported to the director. And the director had no idea what was going on in the rest of the library, at least if it was me, because there were 5 layers of telephone in between there. What we've accomplished instead is to flatten that org chart. And we need, in my opinion, the library and the taxpayers of Carson City are best served by having a relatively flat org chart where you've got a director and assistant director that are directly connected with the folks that are on the front line of the services of the library, and in fact are active participants in those services. That is the only way that we can actually have a finger on the pulse of what's going on. And that is absolutely moving forward, but the devil's in the details of how do we reclass and rework some of those things without tripping across the wires. And I expect to have, without putting pressure on the existing person that's doing the collections development, I expect to have a decision from that person within the next couple of weeks as to whether or not they're willing to accept that as a promotion, even if it means a riskier position vis-a-vis you're no longer a classified worker, you're now an unclassified worker. And I defer to her selection on that because, again, she's doing a great job, and I'm not interested in breaking that today.
Trustees, did we want to chime in with any questions around those vacancies around that?
I just have one question. I see a need for an outreach person. And I don't know that, we run the risk of having someone do too many things, sort of they can do a whole lot of little things, but they can't do any big things. And I think that a library like this really does need someone who is focused on outreach. And if that can be a deputy director, maybe that's helpful. But I don't know that, I sort of, outreach can encompass a lot of things. It can be the person who schedules the pajama story time and the visits to the daycare centers and the adult programming in the evenings. But I see that there could possibly be a need for that.
If I could add to that, though, I don't want to say that I disagree, but I would say
That's okay.
that outreach to me is actually probably more in line with security or even information security, in that it is really should be everybody's job. If you do have a point person who is like, okay, I'm your security guard or your information security officer or your outreach person, fine, they might have specific roles, and that's great. That's a little bit finer tuned. I do know the city does have at least some version of a government affairs, public affairs type person who, yes, they're not a full-time library employee, but they are a full-time city employee who should be a resource that can be tapped. But every staff member is an outreach person, in my view. And being able to clearly articulate the work that you do, how it fits into the community at large, Those are pieces of professional development days. If it's not necessarily something you can just assume, hey, you need to talk about your job more, or you need to, promote the library more. It really is something that could use some specific, explicit development. So, I don't want to say that I disagree that, what an outreach person is or is not needed, but you might be really sorely disappointed when you hire one person to be the cheerleader and the whole team's still not motivated, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm not saying that you necessarily need to hire an outreach person, but there needs to be outreach.
Mhm.
And yes, I agree with you that every employee should be able to be an ambassador, an example of, what it means to work for the library and serve the citizens of the community. But, if you're a technology person, you may not be the person that goes and schedules the story hour or schedules visits to the schools or determines the programming for the summer or whatever. So, it's all mixed up there. It's all mixed up. But outreach is needed.
It's a very broad
Yes.
term.
If I may, Madam Chair, I appreciate the input of both of you. It's critical pathing. You're absolutely right. What we're seeing right now is all of the staff are becoming much more engaged and actively involved, doing outreach within the library, and they're about to begin going out of the library and doing outreach. You're absolutely right, Dr. Markle, in terms of the concept of it up front is in part the deputy or assistant director role. It's also in large part the director's role. But there's an absolute reality that scheduling a lot of this, once the wheels on the bus really get actively rolling, we may well find that we need to repurpose parts of another person. And it might just be in a more administrative capacity so that we can avoid the somebody else's problem button, which is, oh, outreach that's what they do. It's not my problem. This library won't have that problem with me at the helm near term, but it will have the problem of it's bureaucratic and it can be really difficult scheduling all of the things. It requires a conversation at the very top. It requires the leadership of the library to be 100% on its game in the community and within the city. And so bringing the city's public information officer and its function into the same conversation, along with the staff that's scheduling pajama story time. How does this fit together with Weird Science Night? And how does that go with the other event over here? And how do these all dovetail into the library events that we're going to be announcing at the Board of Supervisors? It's a larger effort, and it's an ongoing one. It's one that requires those pieces to be the left hand and the right hand in constant communication, and that will come together. It's something that we'll have to see how that looks. It may be when you see the vacant librarian position that's on there, that may be part of the aspect of it. It may also be part of a staff position that's just working as a liaison. But my intention as the director is to make sure that we keep the shoe on the right foot, that every member of the staff knows that a fundamental part of their role is ambassador. And they do that within the library all day long. We need to get outside of the library now too, and we'll carry that forward. It's actually thrilling and exciting to just imagine where this goes with all of your help, of course. Thank you again.
So just so I repeat back to you what I think I heard you say. Just to make sure I understand you correctly. So the creative learning position to sort of rework as a workforce development, social work librarian, you don't feel would be as time consuming as a process because they are relatively similar enough that they won't need to go through a reclassification?
That's my understanding, Madam Chair. Yes, you're correct. I believe that the function of what we're talking about, that we may be able to we may be able to hire individuals into these positions to fill those roles without having to completely reclassify the position. In other words, the function is contemplated by the existing job description.
Right. And it's just more of a question of emphasis. Okay. So that being the case, do you still feel that 6 to 8 months to fill that particular position is the timeline?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think that it'll take 8 months to fill that position. I think the first priority, but again, the details might change. I'm subject to redirection from HR and the Board of Supervisors, but in my understanding of it, we should be able to prioritize hiring a technology coordinator position here within. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get the job description across the finish line, and through the pylons that it takes to be able to open it up within maybe the next 1 to 2 months. And
I'm
ideally,
sorry, did you say 1 to 2 months?
if that's possible, it's in my opinion, a super high priority.
Okay, that's for the technology coordinator.
Yes.
Is
and
that also true for the workforce development?
Workforce development / social services, in my opinion, is almost, but not at the same level. I would see that one as being prioritized behind the technology coordinator, although they're both going forward simultaneously.
Same 1 to 2 months?
I think it's probably aggressive to anticipate hiring that in 1 to 2 months, because I don't know enough of what I need to know to be able to be reworking that position. That requires time for me to reach out to individuals, and you may have recommendations that I could touch bases with to incorporate those insights and make sure that that function can be met, contemplated under the existing description. Or if we have to rework it, then it gets kicked down into the 5 to 6 month timeframe because of the Board of Supervisors. But if after meeting with and getting input from folks that know more, I have input on the workforce development side. I don't have input on the social work side. I need a little bit more input on that and to be able to brainstorm and work through that job description to get it across the finish line. But in principle, in 2 to 3 months, that hire could be made. The deputy director position or assistant director position is something that I'm given to understand, as it is a reclass, that would have to go through the existing budgetary process, so we're asking for it, and we wouldn't get a green light on that until after July 1 to be able to hire.
Okay, and that sounds like it's your lower priority.
Actually, that is, in my opinion, as much a priority as the technology coordinator, because right now, if I get run over by a truck, there is no succession planning. There is no one to step up other than the department business manager, and frankly, it's inappropriate to be putting that on a department business manager. It is a very real priority, but it's constrained by the mechanics of how the city does things. And so although it's a top priority, it's something that would wait.
All right, we all know bureaucracy, that's fair. Okay. So what was your 6 to 8 month? Was that specific to the collection development manager? Is that position and that decision coming from the current classified staff holding back these other positions? How did those connect or don't connect?
Thank you for clarifying and asking the question, Madam Chair. When you look at the org chart, you see the currently vacant position that's collection development. That is currently being served by a staff member who is a classified staff member under an overload. And that person is doing a remarkable job and has been doing an amazing job. She is the reason why the library's collections are so heavily used, because she has her finger on the pulse of the community and she gets the things that we need to be getting. it's my hope, and she's being compensated for that right now by being paid a 10% overload. We could go one of two ways with that. One is we could open the collection development position to hire from outside and bring someone in, but then we're running the risk of breaking what's already working. And even if we don't break it, we have then two people that are doing the job that's been being done by one person. So wearing the fiduciary responsibility hat, ideally, I'd like to get her to sign the deal to say, yes, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my career, and we'll get compensated for it, and that'll be great. If that's what happens, then what we would do is we would fill that position, or we would open it as an internal recruitment and fill it with ideally that person. If she does not want to do that, then it opens the question mark of what do we do with that position? Because hiring a second person to do that collection development when we already have a team of 4 within the library that are working under this person's leadership is excessive. So the question mark then is, instead we take that position and reskin it as the deputy director. So there is one path that we could go down. It could be that within the next 2 weeks, I hear from this person, no, she doesn't want to leave being a classified employee, and she will be happy to continue doing what she's doing. I will do my best to keep the responsibility pay going as long as the city rules will allow, but that will ultimately stop. But if we get a no from that person within the next couple of weeks, then I'll start working on just reclassing that as the deputy director, and maybe we can get that before 6 months. Maybe we could open that up sooner rather than later. But otherwise, if we hire someone into this position, then we have to go through a different route.
So I understand, I think I understand that the collection development manager position that's vacant and the potential deputy director position are somewhat entangled.
They're entangled, yes, ma'am.
Does that entanglement extend to the other two positions, the technology coordinator and the workforce development?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That entanglement does not extend beyond just where it is right now. The technology coordinator and the workforce development / social work position are already going forward without consideration of what happens with this position.
Okay. I think I've gotten to the end of my list on this. I want to open it up one more time specific to the trustees to add your thoughts on the vacancies, your thoughts on these staffing challenges over time, over the last year or so. Anything to add?
The only thing that I would add is, in terms of positions, I mentioned outreach, but if one of these positions, maybe the workforce development, even a community engagement librarian, which, is a little bit different, but community engagement can also involve collection development and outreach and working with the community to engage the community, whatever that is. And if that can work itself into a social worker or a social work oriented person working within the community, maybe community engagement librarian is another option to explore.
What else? Trustee Lucas, you look like you want to say something.
Are we still getting visits from our social worker to box? Is that what it was? what
Right,
we
the
were
guy
saying?
who's not really a social worker, yes.
Yes.
I believe
Right,
he's still
pardon me.
visiting,
The
yes.
handy dandy person, though, that has powers to help people
Right.
and travels.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Todd Colgrove, yes, through you to Trustee Lucas. we still have that individual coming every Friday and holding office hours throughout the day.
Are we continuing to see community turnout and
Yes.
demand for that?
Indeed, we are continuing to see community turnout and demand. It's not unusual to have someone show up before that individual is there saying, hey, I'm here to see so-and-so. And so we have shifted it slightly so that he's actually, when he's, I hesitate to use the word holding court, but when he's available and the community can come work with him, he's on the open floor up on the second floor of the library where it's very open, where a lot of the demographic that he typically works with are already there using the computers. And so there's a lot more engagement, and he has an ability to go immediately sideways into a semi-private office for the confidential work that needs to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking, though, Trustee Lucas. It's a real game changer for the community that it's working with. And again, Madam Chair, thank you for the recommendation in the first.
Of course. I'm glad to hear some things keep working. That's good. We don't often get to hear about stuff that just works and keeps working the way we thought it would. That's all good. Okay. Well, I have nothing further on item 4D. Is there anything else we can move along, trustees, to item 4E for possible action, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding a draft letter to the State Library Administrator and the State Department Administration requesting that the governor consider recommending more fully funding the library collection development grant and aid program. So we brought this up last time. We'll bring it up again this time. I, in trying to prepare myself for this agenda item, went out to the legislative, the website for the state legislature. This is, I don't know, we have a very unique perspective in Dr. Colgrove because he was formerly the administrator for the State Library and Archives. That's where we poached him from. And so maybe you can speak to a little bit more detail in state budgeting, but it seems to me what we have here is that in Nevada law, right, we have it right here in the letter, and I think it reads something like libraries whose materials over a certain dollar amount can be eligible to receive, and then it actually gives a dollar amount in the statute. And that doesn't necessarily match what's been in the state budget. So I kind of want to get a little bit more background on that. Director Colgrove, if you want to walk us through that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, you're absolutely right. You've described it precisely. Under Nevada, under existing statute 378.087 is a very detailed formula laying out how the state wants to fund its public libraries materials. The state holds it as a real value. Nevada is one of a relatively small number of states that has legislation, existing statute like this, that does support libraries. And it specifically says, in the case of the Carson City Library, a library whose budget for materials is more than $150,000 a year, but less than $500,000, that you're eligible for a grant up to 25% of the amount that you're funding. And you're also eligible for a grant up to another amount. And if you do the math, it turns out that in our community, it would be literally, existing statute would contemplate as much as 6 times more than the amount that we're currently being funded. So on the order of $60,000, which would go a very long way. And I need to be clear, I'm not criticizing the state, but often the left hand gets disconnected from the right hand. And in this case, existing statute has been in place for a long period of time. And there was a period of time when libraries in this state were funded fully under existing statute. And then the Great Recession happened, and all of a sudden, that funding was removed. And it was never restored, even though the economy was restored. So what this library, or what this letter is just basically asking, is that the state library administrator and the department, the director of the Department of Administration, it's respectfully asking that they consider asking the governor to restore or to increase some of the funding that is available to the state's libraries. In this case, again, our budget would go from, it would go from the $7,858 that you see, the existing grant award, which is a big deal, could go anywhere up to $60,000 to $70,000 a year, which would be great. Statewide, though, this is a drop in the overall budget. This is a relatively easy ask for the governor. The last time when this was fully funded statewide, including Las Vegas Clark County Library District, that cost the state less than $1.7 million, right? Right now, the state is putting, it's about $400,000 toward it. So what you're really asking for there is would you be willing to put this forward in your budget for the state library agency to ask the governor to consider more fully funding this, to at least step up and fund what existing statute says the state will fund? There is a risk, of course, with this that perhaps the governor's office would instead say, no, we're not interested in funding that, but we would suggest instead, legislature, why don't you change that statute and remove that altogether, because we have no interest in funding Nevada's libraries. That is a risk, not one I think that would really happen, because I think the last thing anyone in the legislature or in the governor's office wants is librarians from around the state showing up and asking why they're cutting their funds, or why we can't, why the state doesn't want to stand behind what it has said its values are. So the word, in this case, a letter or a conversation with the director of the Department of Administration and the state library administrator, they're in the process right now for the, in between now and these next couple of months, of building their budgets that they're asking the governor to put forward. The worst case scenario is that the governor and the governor's finance office says, no, we're not willing to do that. Best case scenario is that they put it forward and say, sure, we're going to ask for it, because it's a feel-good thing. If it goes forward to the legislature, then the Nevada Library Association and libraries around the state will show up and offer testimony and tell all the wonderful things that Nevada's public libraries are doing. And there's a chance that we might see even a small amount more funding. I mean, $20 goes an incredible distance when it's a book in a library and it's shared with all the other people in the community. And that's a story that we can tell over and over again. I just appreciate the board's considering this ask, because it's the right thing for the citizens of Carson City. It's the right thing for libraries generally. And I would certainly be standing ready to share this letter, if the board is open to it, with other libraries statewide, so that they could just basically plug in their own numbers and carry it forward, and we can have a nice letter writing campaign. And maybe not this next biennium, maybe not the biennium after that, but sooner or later, we will get funding increased for libraries. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was climbing on a soapbox.
Well, while you were doing that, I went ahead and pulled up the most recent legislatively approved budget from the legislature's website, and I'm looking at two categories under the State Library and Archives budget detail here. So the first category does have a line item for expenditures to Carson City listed, and this category, let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing. This is Library Development Title I. Does that sound familiar to you? Thank you. So the one specific for Carson City, it lists all the counties here, but the one specific for Carson City, the actual looks like it's just a base number of $4,470. And then if I move down to another category in the budget is library collection development, where again, every county is listed. Carson's number is $7,015, and that's flat. So that's looks to me like it was a base number. That's what got spent. So that's what's getting allotted in the next biennium request, and that was what had been approved. There is a work program listed, but I won't get into that. Is there any other category I need to be looking at?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're looking at precisely the right category. It is literally library collection development, which would be known in state circles as Code 27 of Budget 2891 for the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records.
All right. So if we're
Okay,
looking,
and sorry to interrupt, but
ahead.
you're absolutely right. That line item in the state budget, and it's available under open budgets on the web. But you'll see when you drill down under Department of Administration to the State Library to Code 27, Library Collection Development, you'll see that that line item is on the order of $400,000. The way that that works is that is one lump sum that is in the budget that the governor puts forward. And then when the governor recommends that budget, it goes to the legislature, and the legislature will look through it with a granular detail, and they may pick apart bits and pieces of it, including this particular line item. But that line item, as it was put forward by the governor last time for $400,000, was approved by the legislature. That number then within the state library gets plugged literally into a spreadsheet that then just parses it out along this so that that number is flat, and it has remained flat. You'll find that the dollar amounts for library collection development are, though, on the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records website for each of the last years going back at least 10 years. But if you drill down into open budget, you'll find that you can go back to see where it was in 2008, 2009, when it was the one glory year when it was actually pretty close to fully funded.
Okay, so with all of that detail, I feel that this letter, if we choose to sign off and move forward with delivering this, communication needs to be delivered in some version of an in-person meeting. I'm happy to have that meeting unless there's anybody else on the board who feels like they want to jump in. I'm not sure if more than one of us wants to be involved in the meeting, if that will constitute a subcommittee. But I'm happy to do it on behalf of the board. But given the nature of the content, this seems to be a conversation starter more than it is a here's a letter for you. But I'm happy to hear anyone disagree with me if you'd like.
I'm definitely not disagreeing with you. I think it's definitely a conversation starter. And I do know from what I used to do for a living, I don't really want to go on the records, I'm sorry, go on about that, that the governor responds really well when you talk about education, when you frame it in an educational way. So when you say maybe some other libraries could, get together, because what I see is, yes, maybe not us, because that would constitute a subcommittee, but if you had other library chairs, help. But I really think actually librarians from schools, if they wrote letters on behalf of public libraries and said, we work hand in hand with libraries, and it's really important they're funded, because let's face it, school libraries aren't as funded as they used to be, and schools are overcrowded, yada, yada, yada. I mean, they work hand in hand. I think that would go a really long way when approaching the governor's office. And I know they're very, very approachable when you want to talk to, even if you don't get to talk to him. someone in his office, to sit down and talk to them, anything to do with education. They're very approachable that way, and that's how I would advise you to frame it.
And we can split that duty if you like. I mean, I think this letter particularly is directed to the Department of Administration administrator, who's in charge of that. They have the division that is the State Library and Archives, and then that person's administrator is the state librarian, who's I think the audience for this letter. So not necessarily someone at the governor's office, but I like the idea. So if we want to divide and conquer those tasks, I wouldn't be opposed to that either, if that's something y'all want to entertain. That looked like a big sigh.
Well, Mike Strom is the library administrator. But he reports to Laura Freed, who's Department of Administration, who then reports to the governor. So I know that libraries have been asking for this for many years. And, it's always a challenge to see, if one more way to get at them works. But I think that going from Mike Strom to the governor's office is taking you're missing a step there.
Well, I think this was for Mike Strom and Laura Freed,
Yeah.
right?
Well, this says copy to her.
Okay.
Madam Chair, you're absolutely right, Trustee Merkel. Director Laura Freed is the one who actually puts the budget forward, and so it is a conversation with both of them. The letter could be redrafted to both of them if you would agree. As the budget is coming from the State Library Agency in principle, the administrator is who's putting that forward, but the director is who decides what she's going to put forward. And it would be good for, honestly, all three to be part of the conversation. At least the conversation initially would be with Administrator Strom and indirectly Director Laura Freed, to make sure that she's aware that we're asking for this and that we're following up with the governor's office. And we're working with the Nevada Library Association in a very active way. So you can't just sweep it under the carpet without the governor having to answer the question of librarians. Why aren't you, why don't you want to support libraries? And so if all three conversations are going on at the same time, then it stands a bit of a chance. And I think this is a good place to begin. In reality, it may take multiple biennia, as you point out, to even move the needle on this. But it certainly won't move if we don't make the effort.
Well, I do need to do a little bit more digging. I got surface level. I need to get a little more granular when I was looking this up. The statute came around in 1997, like it seems like everything else did. And it hasn't been amended, but I think once, and it was a minor amendment since then. So to know kind of historically why those numbers got put in the way they did, and to dive in a little bit more. The other thing too is we always, we're reading an up to number. That doesn't mean it's like has to be that particular number. But the other piece being with state expenditures is use it or lose it, right? So if there has ever been a time where we did not hold up our end on spending, that will surface. So if there's more to this story and more information, as there always is, that would be useful to know going into any kind of advocacy meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're absolutely right. A big part of the story that we did not speak to in this letter because it might complicate things, but it is the fact of the matter that the public libraries around this state are who's providing the state's match for the federal match of and the maintenance of effort, in large part, in order for Nevada to get the nearly $4 million worth of federal funds coming forward. The Carson City Library, in this case, we received $7,858 for fiscal year 2022, which is great. We are incredibly appreciative of that. Those monies will go a long, long way. That said, the Carson City Library put forward over $50,000 this year just in matching database purchases. So the state of Nevada is receiving
Gets
a
to claim
net
50 and-
$42,000 benefit just from that one item. And we provide more match than that. And it's something that we don't talk about, but it is the reality.
And that's certainly a worthwhile point bringing up as well. I just, like I said, this has been kind of preliminary surface scratching for me. I don't really like going into a conversation without having done my research. And so if there's more like that, more that needs to be shared, I will schedule time with you separately. But for the purposes of this agenda item, what I'd like to say is that whether you want more time so I can report back to you on my next layer of, of digging, or you want to sign off on it knowing that I'm going to do the digging either way, how would we like to proceed with this letter? My preference would be that this become a meeting that one of us, probably me, would pursue, and then can report back on. But that's just my preference. So I want to hear what you all. Yeah. Can you turn your microphone on? I'm sorry, so Trustee.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if approved, we would sign the letter, and then you would schedule a meeting, do further research to go in so that you could have a deeper conversation with this letter as a conversation starter.
Great.
That makes sense to me.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I that makes sense to me. Just remember, they're all politicians. No, they'll tell you what you want to hear.
Oh, boy. No disrespect to the elected official in the room. Sorry. Oh, goodness. All right.
Yeah, I agree with your idea.
The only other thing I would add would be that the Nevada Library Association has been very active in continuing to work towards increasing this amount. And whenever there's whenever the legislature meets, there's always library legislative day where libraries from around the state will come and have the opportunity to speak with legislators. It's the budget for libraries, as you said, has stayed pretty flat since the Great Recession. But every year, the Nevada Library Association, gathers up all this material and, gets people excited about going to talk to their legislatures. They schedule time with them at the legislature, have a big lunch. Sometimes that works. I know a couple, not this biennium, but the last one, they were able to, the legislature on the last day of the legislative meeting were able to add, was it $450,000 to the overall budget. So it didn't happen this last time, but it has happened before. So it's an ongoing process. I won't say it's always a battle, but it's an ongoing process that the Nevada Library Association has a lot of knowledge and experience with.
Any more comment on this agenda item?
And does anybody feel like making an action?
Well, we don't have Vice Chair Cranston here with us. If we were, would we all drop by and sign the official copy at the library, or?
That's how we've done these in the past, right?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. That's exactly what we've done in the past. If there are any modifications that you'd like to see, we could make them. Or we could print out the library as it stands and have it at the service desk, the info desk in the library for you to come by and sign at your convenience. And then Chair Knight would have that ready to go.
Does that sound okay to you all? Do we have any edits, changes to the actual verbiage? Oh,
I'm sorry, whoever just spoke, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, what would the action then is that the board approves the letter, and do we have to state that we're going to sign it? Like, what would be the full action for this item?
The action is sufficient if you just indicate, I move to approve the letter as presented, and that would be sufficient.
Okay. Well, I will move to approve this letter to Michael Strom, the division administrator, as written.
I second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Hi, sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting.
Giving us a little bit of dramatic pause there, Vice Chair. All right. Motion passes. Thank you so much. Let's move on down the agenda. Information only, item 5. This is a presentation discussion of reports concerning activities. This is all back to Dr. Colgrove.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before I go forward, thank you, trustees, for your support of that advocacy effort with libraries. It's an absolute game changer. I wanted to share, before I get into the report, I wanted to share, and you already have a copy of it, so I'm incorporating it by reference, but the new, the city's COVID-19 policy, which is holding sway within the library for staff. The gist of it is that if someone tests positive, stay home for at least 5 days. And if you're showing symptoms, and even if you haven't tested positive, stay home. That's impacting and exacerbating the challenges that we've had here. At this point, on top of the vacancies, we've also had now at least 2 for certain confirmed COVID cases, one of them still out, and the third with symptoms. And so we have a little bit of a challenge saying, when you're showing symptoms, don't show up all excited in the doorway and say, oh, I'm having symptoms. Just stay home and get well. Everyone so far is doing well. It hasn't been that critical in terms of a health issue, but it has presented challenges within the library. As I mentioned, former Access Services Manager Ermal Reinhardt is no longer with the library. I also wanted to mention, as a quick update, the CWEP program, that we're quite proud to get that across the finish line and get our first volunteer. We lost that first volunteer relatively immediately, and we're still trying to get that going again. Also, in terms of advisory, I wanted to make sure that the board was aware that despite all of the chaos, we've still not had to close the library. We've been able to keep the library open. We've had no closures unanticipated otherwise. We've only had to close the Act 2 floor 5 days out of the last 52. So it's an impact, but not like it is closing the entire library, because we've been able to accommodate the folks that would otherwise have been using the Act 2 with computers that are down on the main floor of the library. Again, I have to say, we've only been able to do that and maintain the programming at the previous levels in the library, including story time and Lego Club and book club, because of staff's 110% engagement. Particular kudos to Department Business Manager Joy Holt, who along with me is covering weekends and after hours till 8 o'clock at night and the early parts of the morning. We will get to the other side of this. And I also, just on a shiny note, I wanted to mention that the chess club has rebooted in the library. I know that it was mentioned, the board discussed maybe putting an outdoor chess table at one point. But we had community members approach, and this will now be the third weekend in a row that they're meeting. And so if any of you know anyone that's interested in chess, come into the Digi on Saturdays from 1 to 3. It's really kind of fun. Also, works in progress. I wanted to let the board know that thanks, in large part, to the donation of funds from the Friends of the Carson City Library this past year, we have now solved the problem that we were having with the RFID book gates in the library. They have not only been purchased, but they have been installed. They are working as of yesterday. And I'm proud to say that we are fully 2.5 months ahead of schedule on that. So that's a critical path problem that we were able to solve and despite supply chain issues, get across the finish line. So we're moving on to the next steps with that. Again, just clarity in terms of the RFID book gates, those are the equivalent of shoplifter gates if you go into a retail store. Particularly important in the library, not so much because we're worried about someone shoplifting, a popular novel that might cost $20, but because there's a lot of technology in the library as well that is pretty mobile. And so it's important that we show that we're keeping eyes on it and that we're making sure that things get checked out and that they belong to the right parties. Other than that, I don't know that there's more news to report that I haven't already shared. And out of respect for this board who has already done such a marathon session tonight, I will step back and field any questions that you might have for the fiscal reports. That, again, apologies that they got to you as late material. I trust that each of you did get copies of the financial reports, and they've been included on the website and in the handout materials. If there are any questions, I stand ready to do the best that I can to answer them when it comes to the financial reports.
Thank you, Director Colgrove. Any questions from the board on the reports listed out for this item?
I guess without a question though, I would jump in and clarify a couple of things that might look a little strange on the 230 gift fund report. And that's in particular when you look down the second to the bottom line item, furnitures and fixtures that has a negative $6,392 amount in it. That's actually the dollar amount that the Friends of the Carson City Library was able to provide us this year. And that's the dollar amount that went toward purchasing the book gates. And it has yet to get funded appropriately in the budget. That will happen with journal entries, moving it from the undesignated amounts column to cover the furniture and fixtures. The same, similar story as you've got a couple of negative amounts with the hourly seasonal of negative 347 and some Medicare and workers' compensation, along with books, periodicals, and publications of a negative $101. And those dollar amounts were basically associated with the Think Bionics program that was funded previously that got overspent, frankly. And so now we're balancing that out, if that makes sense. And also the corresponding part of the book gates that you see on the furniture and fixtures is in the 101 general fund budget. On the line item second to the bottom again, negative $7,405.43. That's the dollar amount that we put toward the book gates from the city funds. And so when you take those two and add them together, that's basically what the book gates cost to get them installed and up and running. And I one more time had to have department business manager, Holt, explained to me the story about the pool slide refurbishing. And she said to just calm my jets because that is literally a byproduct from an earlier day when we had a different budgeting system. And that number, the object number, was something that the library used at one point in the past. And then when they migrated to the new system, that number got repurposed by a different department. But since it already is anchored in the past to the library, apparently it's always going to show up on our reports. So all hope of ever getting a pool slide in the library is gone, but it will probably stay with us as long as we're on this system. So I know that the department business manager, Holt, has talked at length with the city finance officers about getting these spurious entries off, and it's just simply not likely to happen.
Thank you, Director Colgrove. Any questions, any follow-up on this agenda item? Hearing none. All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to agenda item 6, board members' announcements and requests for information. Any takers?
I just want to say, without crying, that tonight was the first time I actually heard about Phyllis. I didn't know of her passing. And I just want to, I'm hoping maybe in the future we will do something for her, and I don't want to cry. She was my introduction to Carson. She was my introduction to the library and my introduction to volunteering for the library. I used to volunteer for her and worked with her a lot, and she's going to be greatly missed.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. With that, let's move right along then to public comment. Item 7. Still not seeing any members of the public, but you want to take?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Todd Colgrove, if I may chime in on that, I just wanted to thank Trustee Nichols for sharing that anecdote about Trustee Patton. Phyllis was also my first introduction to the Carson City Library System after I first met it when I was a little boy, just a wee lad. But later on in life as a professional, Phyllis is who roped me in, along with former state librarian Tammy Westergaard, to be of support to the MT1 program here and carrying things forward. She was also the first one to grab me by the short hairs and say, we're going to go get a coffee and we're going to talk about how we do this right. So she is already sorely missed. If I may, Madam Chair, I wanted to share to the board and to the members of the public that there is a Phyllis Patton Memorial account or fund that the Friends of the Carson City Library are funding or are curating. And so far this year, they've received $600. So I would invite any members of the public to join me in contributing to that and keeping that as a legacy. Thank you, Madam.
And thank you. Do you have any other comment? Okay. Moving on, let's go ahead and adjourn ourselves. Thank you, trustees. We are adjourned. Have a great evening.